and the houses beneath them shone snow-white. Tiny figures moved about, their feet hardly touching the ground as they danced and leapt, throwing their hats into the air where the sun turned them to fire. She wanted to call out to them, but when she opened her mouth to speak, no sound came. The sun disappeared, the air became thick, and she struggled to breathe. She smelled something rotten. She choked. Then she slept. Someone was shaking her. She opened her eyes. Daylight filtered in through a grimy window, and the diminutive woman she'd seen the night before stood over her, motioning for her to rise. She struggled to her feet, put out her hand to brace herself against a blackened wall, and looked around for the man who'd brought her to this dismal place. He wasn't there, but on the floor where she'd been sleeping lay her cloak, and beside it a coin. The old woman took her hand and led her to the fireplace. There were no flames, only blackened ashes, but the sickening smell she'd noticed the night before still filled the room, and she started to gag. "You will be away from here soon," the woman said, her voice shrill and grating. She bent down, her misshapen body contorting as she crouched, and twisted her head so she could look up at her. She pointed to something on the ground. "This is what you came for. You know what to do with it." She lifted the corner of a ragged blanket. Under it was a baby. The child, tightly wrapped in a tattered oil-stained cloth, gazed at her with huge eyes protruding from a skeletal face, one side of which was covered with an ugly black mark. She could hardly look at the baby, it was so thin and its face so disfigured. Dazed and confused, she tried to understand. Then she remembered, and she drew back in horror. The grotesque little woman struggled to her feet and grabbed her wrist. "It's too late to change your mind now, ma petite chérie." She pulled her to where her cloak lay on the floor. "Don't forget this." She picked up the cloak and threw it over her shoulders. The old woman drew her back to the fireplace, lifted the baby in its greasy covering, and thrust it into her arms. She handed her the coin and pushed her toward the door. "It's light now," she said. "You can find your way." She shut the door, leaving the young woman to creep alone down the crumbling staircase and out into the street as the dawn broke. 1. The people of France were greatly dispirited by the king's illness, for when the head is sick, all the limbs feel it. Froissart, Chronique, Livre 4, 1389 to 1400. Paris, late March, early April, 1396. Christina put down her pen and contemplated the book she was copying for the Duchess of Orleans. She'd come to the story of the fox and the grapes, and she took a moment to savour it. Aesop's fables provided a welcome respite from her worries. She worked in a room at the top of a tower, a sunlit space in the residence the Duke and Duchess of Orleans occupied across the street from the other buildings of the royal palace, the Hôtel Saint-Paul. She went to an open window and looked out at those buildings, reflecting that somewhere in one of them her pitiful king paced the floor, tearing his hair and biting his fingernails. The king had been mad for nearly 4 years. He had periods of sanity, but he always relapsed, succumbing to a mysterious illness that periodically enveloped him in darkness and despair. Then he would become a poor caged creature who tore at his clothes and howled words that should never issue from the mouth of a monarch. He would forget he was king, flee from the queen, and rage around the palace in such a blind fury that his retainers had to bolt the doors to keep him from running naked out into the streets of the city. Even his intervals of lucidity were filled with horror, for the knowledge that his illness would return preyed on his mind.